Thank you for watching BlaXit. Please subscribe to our channel BlaXit, smash that like button and share everywhere.
Resources. The resources are available, but we have poverty in the mind. I think it's high time for us to come together to steer the wheel to ensure we reach to the promised land. We suffered a lot in the history. We were abused, harassed. But now we say we know our rights. But still, we remain where we are. It's fundamentally to ask, what's wrong with us as Africans? Then leadership is crucial. So we must have leaders who are honest, dedicated to the cause. Thank you, Honorable Salah, for the presentation.
So should we go ahead? Okay, it's right there. Let me apologize for the technology. You know, we can. I think that points out to all the important things that the previous speakers talk about. That is education, you know, and knowledge. I think we really need more of that. But I also want to thank the organizers for this conference. I'm very thrilled to be part of this, and I think this is a very, very important issue for all of us, particularly even for us living abroad, and how we feel as Africans, you know, working in the streets of either New York or Boston or all these places. Or even in Europe, wherever I go, I don't think they see me as a Wolof or a Jola or a Mandinka. They look at me and see a black man walking down the street and they will spit on me. You know, I have experienced that myself many times. And I'm sure they spit on me not because I'm Wolof or I am Jola, but they spit on me because I'm a black man. So, and I think it points out to what Honorable Halifa Saleh said before, that I think there is a need for a strong unity with, among all black people all around the world. You know, and I think that's very, very important. So today they have charged me to say a few things about prominent captives from the River Gambia or from the Senegambia or from the Greater Senegambia. I don't know which is which, because I think in the past they think that Senegambia includes all the way from Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, Senegal, all this, which they used to call the Greater Senegambia. And so we are talking about people who have been unfortunately transported from this region to the New World and to other parts of the world. So many theories about slavery or slave trade, and there are so many. I think slavery is one of those topics that so much have been written about, over the years. So there are various histories, various theories of what happened, where, when, you know, all these kinds of things. But I think there are a few prominent ones that are very important for this discussion. So I want to talk about, I want to say a word about the early years of slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade, and all these things, and then I'll talk. I'll give an example of these well-known captives from the Senegambia region. And of course, what I'm most interested about is what I call the enduring reach of the slave trade, or enduring reach of slavery. And I want to say a few words about that. We all know that slavery, of course, is an ancient institution. It existed as long as human beings, as long as human beings exist, right? Throughout human history, it appeared all over the world, in Africa, ancient Europe, all over the world. And we also know that Africans have been traded as slaves or captives for centuries, particularly through what, the trans-Saharan trade routes. We know that ancient Africa, had a fabulous and very strong trade routes, linking North Africa with West Africa, East Africa, and all the way to the south. And Africans have used this for centuries, exchanging goods, particularly religion, particularly Islam, and of course wars and all these things, and most importantly also resources for state building in these regions, particularly in the West African region for several centuries. So the most scholars, I mean, the prominent scholars who have talked about this are many, but there are one or two who sort of, I mean, they have opposite views on this. Some people think that, people like J.D. Fage and others, they think that slavery is an African thing. You know, they had this crazy idea that, you know, Africans always had slavery, which was sort of a little bit more negative in a sense, right? And they think that slavery was in Africa even before the Europeans came. So what the Europeans did actually was just capitalize on these existence, I mean, on these reservoirs of slaves and exported them to Europe. That's one key idea. And for them, what happened was that African kings and merchants exploited all these reservoirs of slaves that were in Africa already. But other people came out and said, look a minute, you know, that's not the point, you know, because there were very strong institutions in Africa, and slavery as we know it, you know, never existed in Africa, but Africa had some forms of relationships, and we know all these things traditionally, right? Whether these are, you know, is it an uncle thing we used to do, like Barindo Kool and all these things, right? So these scholars think that slavery as we know it today was introduced by Europeans, you know, through the Atlantic Wall. And I think this is really important. So the existence of all these sort of, which they call quasi-feudal relationships, you know, was not a matter of exploitation as such, but forms of dependencies, if that makes sense. So one of the most important scholars in this debate is a guy called Walter Rodney. I don't know if you know about this guy, but so my brothers here, they know. But one of the most brilliant sort of Africans or Caribbean, I think he's from Guyana, you know, who came up with this, you know, who debunked some of these, you know, theories of slavery in Africa. He's one of the greatest guys. So his idea really was that slavery was really a break in African development, really disrupted developments in Africa for so many reasons. You know, slavery also transformed African societies in negative ways, you know, kind of a thing. And it, in a sense, in the long run, it's really detrimental to African people. Right? Slavery was not really profitable, because not only in terms of the human numbers, but also intellectually. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because many people thought that, oh, people who were transported to Europe and to America and all these things, you know, they believe that Africans went to America in a vacuum. That makes sense. Like, they did not carry any knowledge with them. But now scholars are coming around and debunk all of those kinds of crazy ideas. And I think that's why the people we are going to talk about today are important. So just some few numbers, you know that, I mean, we cannot see the PowerPoint, but I'm just trying to emphasize that thousands and thousands of, or millions of Africans have been taken abroad to Europe. And in Senegambia alone, you know, in what we are talking about, at the height of slavery, almost every year, 2,000 people, at least 2,000 people were, you know, were transported out. Yearly, 2,000 people found themselves in the US and many other places, in the Caribbean and other places. So as you can see here in the map, so the bigger the line is, for example, places like Southwest Africa, you know, Nigeria and all those, you have many more millions than in Gambia. But it's Gambia, 2,000, and it's a lot. I think it's quite a large number yearly. So one of the most prominent of these captives who, actually I don't like calling them slaves in a sense, because now scholars are even thinking that nobody should use the word slave, but captives, because these people were not slaves in the first place. They were all kidnapped in wars and all kinds of crazy things. So one of these people was Ayuba Suleiman Jallo. According to Philip Cotton in particular, they said, He is either called Ayuba Suleiman Jallo or used to be called Job Ben Solomon. And as we know, Job Ben Solomon was captured by enemies somewhere in the interior of the river Gambia, specifically where is not known, but at least around 1731, he was captured and then sent to Maryland in the US as a slave, where he worked on tobacco plantations. We also know that he was born Muslim, so therefore he went into slavery already as an intellectual, if that makes sense. So while he was enslaved, he tried a few times to escape, and then he was captured by an individual who kind of discovered his education and quality, sort of meaning that this guy is not an ordinary guy, he's not an ordinary so-called captive. So he got emancipated and then taken to England, and from England he was sort of helped and returned back to Africa at some point. So there are many other individuals during the slave trade who had same experience. There was this another individual from, I think, from somewhere from southern Nigeria, but who was also captured and went into slavery, then went back to Africa. But this guy went back into slavery, into selling people. So the biggest question is, how in the world somebody would experience all of these terrible would have all these terrible experiences, would send back to Africa and then continued back into slavery or selling people? Those are questions that maybe we need to think about. So Ayuba was important also when he returned back to the Senegambia. He worked with what is called the Royal African Company, because you know in the early days also, as our brother just mentioned, what the Europeans did was that instead of Britain, the government of Britain controlling all these African territories, they had companies that were running, Africa for them, profiting, trade and all these things, sort of to continue this sort of, continue exploitation of Africa and African resources. So all these companies were important, and in this area, I think the Royal African Company was quite important here. So they made so when Ayuba was sent back again to the Senegambia, they sort of recruited him or they related with him so that they could even have more access to the interior of the African continent to exploit the area even more in terms of resources. Unfortunately, Ayuba died quite early, 1773. So the reason why he was captured, they thought that he was sent by his father to buy sort of paper, which really explained that he was already a scholar, paper to write, for maraboutic things, right? So when European ships come, they usually brought along some type of, lots of goods that these African scholars were interested in. So in buying paper, unfortunately, he was not successful in this particular slave ship. So he tried to go further into the interior to cross the Gambia River from the southern side to the northern side to look for the material he was looking for. Unfortunately, he was captured by his enemies and sent into slavery. So another, this guy, there is another interesting guy called Duty Bookman, and the name is Sonia. Bookman means, of course, in simple translation, someone who likes books. This Bookman was also considered as a high priest, who was also purportedly sort of captured from the Gambia River, and this guy was sent to San Domingo mainly, Haiti and Jamaica around 1791. So according to C.L.R. James, one of the most wonderful sort of writers on slavery, Bookman was head of a plantation and was also very interested in the welfare of his fellow captives, who became also as a priest. He also had a certain type of knowledge, right? Particularly in healing and curing in the African way, right? Because so we necessarily sort of, as I said before, this idea that African went into slavery without any knowledge is just foolish. These are kind of foolish thoughts, because these people were able to navigate slavery with their knowledge. sort of by controlling their slave masters, by controlling other sort of captives on slave plantations, and by curing, they were able to at least escape somehow themselves the brutalities of slavery, particularly on the plantations. Bookman was one of the greatest, his greatest contributions was we all know about the sort of the rebellion in Haiti, where slaves sort of organized themselves and led a rebellion sort of for freedom. And Bookman actually was part of the original organizers of this event, where they tried to free themselves from from their cruel masters. This rebellion, unfortunately, was not successful, but it was very, very important because it shows the desire and the willingness of these African people sort of to free themselves from their oppressors in a way. And I found fascinating that the speech that he gave during this, to encourage other slaves to be part of this rebellion, I think was important. As you can see here, it said, the God who created the sun which gives us light, who rouses the waves and rules the storm, though hidden in the clouds, he watches us. He sees us all that white man does. He sees all that the white man does. The God of the white man inspires him with crime, but our God calls upon us to do good works. I think that's really important at that time. Our God, who is good to us, orders us to revenge our wrongs. He will direct our arms and aid us. Throw away the symbol of the God of whites, who has so often caused us to weep, and listen to the voice of liberty, which speaks in the heart of us all. Can you imagine a guy, on a slave plantation at this time, thinking or reasoning, having these kinds of ideas, particularly in terms of the relationship between oppressors and the oppressed. So another, one of the most sort of famous of all these captives from this Senegambia was Phyllis Whitley. I think it's good to have at least a female among all of these. Phyllis Whitley, also purportedly from the Gambia in 1753. Unfortunately, Phyllis was captured at a very young age, at the age of 8, and he was also enslaved in New England, which is also in the USA. But fortunately for Whitley, her masters were very grateful, turned out to be very nice people who allowed her to be educated, because we know that at this time, all these captives were like, no education for them at all. Because how could ignorant and, undignified people be educated? But fortunately for Whitley, she very quickly, understood English and Latin, and naturally she was just gifted, and she began to write, lots of books, and unfortunately too, she could not even publish this book in the U.S. She went to England, where she published the first book, which is on being brought from Africa to America. Even after this book, white people were like, no way, they had to call her. It's like if you are defending your dissertation, like they call, all these luminary people to sit down and discuss what this young woman wrote. Is this real? Is it written by this poor African? It's incredible, and she was well versed in poetry, very fortunate to sort of traverse slavery. But unfortunately, she died very young. She later married and had 3 children, and all these kids died very young and could not, unfortunately for Whitley. But I think one of the most well-known sort of captives in the New World, in the Americas. So to sort of wrap all of these things up, I want to say one word about what I call enduring reach of slavery, because even if we look at, even in our own societies today, so for example, we look at, should I say, even the Gambia right now. You look at, as I said, unfortunately, those people who have been enslaved, or who were part of captives, we know that slavery is something we don't talk about these days, right? Everything we want to put under the carpet. So what is called enduring reach means that the arms are long. So for example, former captives, people who were former slaves, cannot even now marry so-called people who think that they were, what is the word for it? They were, right? All these crazy ideas, right? But not only that, but you cannot even become an imam if they think that you are part of this formal. And these are things we don't talk about, but I think it's important that at some point we sit down and talk about this, as I said, because nobody was a slave in the original place. Unfortunate wars happened, some people were captured and sent away. And even other scholars thought that slavery is something that it became an institution because it lasted for over 400 years. So it became part of a people's life, it became an institution. Whether you like it or not, if you don't participate in it, you will be sold, right? You have to sell people or you will be sold yourself. So it's not my fault, it's not Honorable Salah's fault, it's not, this is a societal thing. And I think we need to look at it. So another part of this enduring reach is that even in everywhere else where you find black people, whether it's Jamaica or the US or England, this thing is there. As I said at the beginning, they look at us as a black person, all right? And they treat us because we were enslaved before, which means that they still look at us and think that, oh, these black people are worth nothing, right? And I think these are things that by this conference or these returnees, this is why I think that we should study, we should educate ourselves about this. It doesn't mean that we have to have PhDs, but I think education is knowledge, and knowledge can be found anywhere, anyhow, in any way, right? It's just a matter of understanding, certain conditions that existed about us and how we can deal with this as a people, as Gambians. And I think this is very, very important. Can I shut my mouth? All right, thank you so much for listening.
One nation, one Africa. Thank you, BlaXit family. Please keep watching and remember, follow your dreams.
Purchase your tracks today. Purchase your tracks today.